Hey y'all, welcome back to another video. I'm talking today about different funding sources for the early years of your farm. It's so critical, especially in these first few years when you're starting out, to know what all the resources available to you are. So I wanted to talk about some of our strategies, what we've utilized, and how that's helped us get started. Before we get into it, please make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. And let me know about any other funding sources I may have left out and how that's helped you. When we started Wild East, we wanted to have a multifaceted strategy for securing enough funding to start the farm quickly. We spent several years, about 6 years, really diligently saving the income that we had. I was working in various fields, including arboriculture, forestry, wildlife biology, and ultimately managing another farm right before we came here. And Lyric had various roles in the local food scene in the community. None of those positions were particularly high paying, but we're fortunate to live in a situation with low rent, and we started growing more and more of our own food each year as we got more and more serious about starting our own endeavor. And on a combined salary of just about $3,000 a month that we would make, $3,000 to $4,000 at different periods there, we were able to save over half of that and put on average about $20,000 a year into savings, because we were living below our means. We were taking very few vacations, and the ones that we did were cheap and budget friendly. Like I said, we were growing our own food, so we had a lower grocery bill. We didn't rely on extravagant entertainment, like weren't going to concerts very often, and often found free entertainment in the woods behind our house or with the chickens or vegetables that we were raising. And it was during that time we developed a strong mindset around thrift and frugality, which I think not only are helpful in starting a farm and getting into it, but also useful skills to have through the years as a farmer. There are other elements of starting the farm that we were fortunate with what was already provided on the property when we arrived. For example, our chicken processing shed here is situated under a carport that's 24 feet by 24 feet that was on a different part of the property upon arrival. And it was one of the very first projects we undertook to move it single-handedly in my first week to get it to where we wanted the processing shed to be. Now in here, we've also gotten grants to improve the processing facility. There's one local grant in particular that we secured to purchase a brand new, really state-of-the-art scalder and plucker, and that is called WNC Ag Options. And it's funded through the Tobacco Trust of North Carolina, which is essentially a program that when they changed the rules around producers for tobacco, when the health concerns became nationally recognized, there was money put away to help support farmers transitioning out of tobacco into other forms of production, and that money is still helping farmers today. We've gotten our caterpillar tunnels paid for through NRCS EQIP funding through their high tunnel program. Now, some folks may not be familiar with the program in general, but across the country there's the opportunity to have the purchase of high tunnels or Farmer's Friend Caterpillar tunnels reimbursed by the NRCS in an effort to improve growing conditions for farmers around the country. Something that we found out is that since they reimburse not based on a receipt or based on your actual cost, but based on the square footage of the project, if you spend less money on the actual structure, for example, a caterpillar tunnel, but it fills a square footage reimbursement rate, they can actually give you a check for more than you spent. In our case, the North Carolina state reimbursement rate essentially allows us to buy caterpillar tunnels and get paid back more than twice what we paid. We bought 2 caterpillar tunnels last summer using this funding, and we were reimbursed over $13,000 more than we spent, which is totally fine by their standards. And we used that money to fund a significant portion of this propagation tunnel. So that's a very creative way to utilize funding to make an improvement over here, and then any excess funding that can come through those programs can be spent to improve the farm in other ways. Another strategy we had was to not go into significant amounts of debt to get the farm started. So we had over $50,000 saved up, still leaving a buffer for a personal nest egg to invest in the business off the bat. We also wanted, as I've talked about in other videos, to begin with very quick cash flowing enterprises like the broilers and the market garden, so that in these first years we could reinvest our income and our profit into expanding and improving the farm rapidly. We have utilized some minor forms of debt. We've taken out some zero interest credit cards that have 18-month payback periods at times to purchase bulk orders of feed. We feel comfortable doing this because we are confident in our ability to produce the livestock and pay that back before the terms of the zero interest expire. And it has the benefit of not creating a crunch with cash flow in our actual bank account as we're working with other operating costs like paying ourselves, paying employees, and the miscellaneous day-to-day that adds up on a farm like this. I'd only recommend taking the zero interest credit card approach if you feel extremely confident in your ability to pay it back before interest kicks in, because otherwise you can find yourself in a tricky position. Something that's a bit less flexible but is available is the USDA has very, very low interest loans available with generous payback terms for operating costs. So things like I'm describing, feed and payroll. It's not something I recommend necessarily doing, again, unless you are really kick-ass in your production practices and have that confidence. I don't ever recommend farmers getting into it to take on debt like that, because there's a learning curve, and the risk you can put yourself in by being indebted to an institution and not knowing your ability to produce certainly can put you in a position where financial stress and ultimately burnout and relationship troubles and all these issues can emerge from that. So it's something to go into cautiously, and in my mind to only do so if you're really, really sure about your ability to make that money and pay it back in the terms that you agree to. This is a bit of a funny shot, I imagine, but I'm standing in our battery room for the solar array and the off-grid system we have set up here on the farm. First off, I wanted to introduce this program called REAP, and it's the program through the USDA that can reimburse folks up to 40% of the cost of solar installation projects. So again, it's a government incentive to help people have greater access to things that are going to improve their production, their self-sufficiency, their energy production, all of these things. I also wanted to touch base about the fact that because we lease the farm and we don't own this land, we have an agreement with the landowner where certain pieces of infrastructure, we have it arranged that as the owner, he'll pay for them. And some of those improve our farm operations, like the solar. The way that that arrangement shakes out is that we naturally, are fully financially responsible for all of the infrastructure that is strictly related to the farm, that is not permanent infrastructure, i.e., if for some reason we had to pack up and move the farm or anything like that, it's our asset owned by the business. Things that are invested in the land, such as permanent infrastructure that doesn't fit that category, doesn't make sense for us to purchase, because if we were to leave, it's not our asset. It's an immovable asset, and it's improving the land and the value of that as well. So we found ourselves in a unique lease opportunity where that access to some resources has been available, while still demanding of us that we are very strict with our numbers and we're not dependent whatsoever on this arrangement for the farm growing or functioning or operating or any of that. But it's also to share that lease opportunities like this can exist. And I think it's really important for landowners who are interested in having farmers lease their land to understand this reality, that farmers are deterred often to lease property instead of purchasing it because they don't want to sink a bunch of their hard-earned money into improving land that they may not be on for the long haul. So those kind of arrangements are natural in my mind and make sense, where there's a give and take and an ebb and flow depending on the scenario and depending on whether the asset being invested in fits into either one of those categories. Is it a movable part of the farm that's directly tied to production, or is it a permanent improvement in things like infrastructure that whether or not that farmer's there is going to be there and continue to improve the value of the property? And on that note, not owning your farm to get started can be a really great strategy. In today's real estate market in the United States, just the cost of the mortgage and the down payment can set you back years and years in the actual growth of a farm business, especially if you don't come into it flush with cash. For the reasons I described, I think a lot of folks have an aversion to leasing land. But for so many other reasons, even if you don't plan on being on the leased property for the long haul, the value of having the opportunity to start your business and to build a reputation, to get better at farming, all while not being tied down with a permanent mortgage and all of your cash put into a heavy down payment, can be really critical and the difference maker between having a nice go of it to get started or being in immense debt and really struggling to get started. Now, I can only speak from our experience and our region in terms of what I can share, but depending on where you are in the country or the world, there's often specific grant programs, cost share programs, and these different ways to help farmers secure access to funding. There's so much money laying out there on the table, and it's really up to each farmer to do their due diligence and stay tuned to what is available to them. So what does that look like? It looks like constantly researching, finding new grant opportunities and things of the like, and refining your skills around making your case for why your project is a compelling project. We don't get every grant that we apply for, but even the ones that we don't get, we learn from and we hone our skills and our ability to write in the way that these funders want us to write in. And that's really critical. So I recommend any opportunity you get going to grant writing workshops, practicing writing grants, and going into them without the expectation that you'll get them and feeling disappointed if you don't, but always just seeing it as an opportunity to refine those skills. And then ultimately, while we won't ever totally shy away from these funding sources, we want the income of our farm to be fully sustaining all of the improvements and projects that we do over time. And we foresee being able to make that transition in the next year or two. From the start of our farm, we had in mind that by year 5, we'd be totally independent from any type of outside funding coming from personal money, grants, government programs, or anything of the like, so that we can demonstrate that a small farm like ours can really stand on its own 2 feet. So that's it for today's video. Just talking a little bit about some of our strategies to get funding to start our farm, some resources that may be available to you, some of the steps that you can take in researching in your own context and region. And like I said at the beginning, please comment below. I'm curious if anyone else has any additional insight to share, as I think that this conversation around capital and finances in the small farm context is underspoken about, and I'm not really sure why, because it's such a critical part that we all need to be learning from each other in regards to. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.